Ladies, I need you to lean in for a moment, because tonight we're not sugarcoating truth. We're not pretending we don't see the signs. We're stepping out of the cycle of over-explaining, over-giving, and under-receiving. See, there comes a moment in every woman's life where silence becomes sacred. Not because she's bitter, not because she's broken, but because she's finally ready to be heard by heaven and not just tolerated by a man. A man will do this when you stop talking to him. Oh, that silence? That's not weakness, that's warfare. That's a woman understanding her worth, taking back her power, and letting her absence speak louder than her presence ever could. Tonight, we're going to talk about the shift that happens not when you beg him to change, but when you refuse to settle, when you stop showing up for someone who only shows up when you're slipping away. Because sometimes the greatest change doesn't come when you speak, it comes when you stop speaking. Let's go deeper. Silence shifts the power dynamic in ways that words often fail to accomplish. When a woman chooses silence, not out of anger, but out of clarity, something divine happens in the atmosphere. The energy changes. The control once held by one party begins to slip, and suddenly what felt secure becomes uncertain. See, people often become comfortable with your voice explaining your pain. They get used to your text messages, your check-ins, your emotional labor. They start to rely on your willingness to always talk things through, to mend the bridge, to hold the relationship together with words, even when they're not showing up with actions. But the moment you go quiet, that's when the imbalance is exposed. There is a weight in silence that makes a man confront himself. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects his behavior without accusation. It brings to light what your voice has been trying to explain for weeks, months, sometimes years. When a woman stops talking, it doesn't mean she no longer cares. Often, it means she has cared too much for too long without reciprocity. It's a boundary wrapped in peace. And that boundary, it's not built to punish, it's built to preserve. When you choose silence, you are reclaiming your emotional energy. You are shifting from reaction to reflection. You are stepping away from proving your worth to simply knowing it. That changes everything. A man who is used to having access to your thoughts, your explanations, your presence, and your emotional availability will feel the void. He may not show it right away. Pride and ego have a way of masking vulnerability. But trust that the silence speaks. It calls out things that your conversations could never reach. Men often don't respond to lectures. They don't shift under pressure, but they do notice absence. They feel the disconnect when the energy isn't flowing like it used to. When you stop talking, he has to sit with what you used to say. The words he ignored, the needs he dismissed, the effort he took for granted, they all echo louder in your silence than they ever did in your presence. This is the beginning of the power dynamic shifting, not in a manipulative way, but in a soulful way. Because here's the truth, communication without comprehension is exhausting. And if you've been talking to someone who listens to respond but not to understand, your silence becomes the most powerful language you'll ever speak. It's a declaration that you are no longer participating in a dynamic that costs you your peace. It's a spiritual reset. And while he might think it's just a mood or a phase, what he's really experiencing is the unraveling of his control, not because you're playing games, but because you're done playing roles that never valued your truth. When you stop talking, he has to wonder. He starts remembering. He replays the last conversation, the last look, the last moment he felt your presence fully. The space you used to fill becomes a reminder of what he didn't steward well. And the longer the silence lingers, the louder it gets, not in a noisy way, but in a soul-stirring, gut-checking way. It calls a man higher. It gives him space to either grow or go, but either way, you're no longer carrying the weight of his indecision. Women are nurturers by nature. We want to fix, to heal, to communicate, to connect. But there comes a time when silence is the most nurturing thing you can give to yourself. Because silence doesn't mean avoidance. It means you've chosen clarity over chaos. It means you're done repeating yourself in conversations that go nowhere. It means you trust that if someone truly values you, they'll move toward your peace, not wait for your panic. The power dynamic begins to shift when you stop managing someone else's emotional capacity and start honoring your own. Silence forces accountability. It forces presence. A man now has to do the work of thinking, of feeling, of searching within himself instead of relying on you to lay it all out for him. That's power, not domination, not manipulation, but the power of self-respect, of knowing your value, of choosing stillness over struggle. In that silence, you begin to hear God more clearly. You begin to reconnect with your intuition. You realize that your peace is not up for negotiation. You realize that the conversations you were having weren't really conversations. They were just you trying to make someone care in the way you deserve to be cared for. And when you stop talking, it's not just to make a man react, it's so you can recalibrate. You see, silence has the power to disrupt dysfunctional patterns. It breaks the rhythm of emotional dependency. It creates space for someone else to step up, to lean in, or to walk away. But whatever they choose, you're no longer begging for clarity. You are the clarity. Your silence says, I'm no longer available for confusion. It says, if you want access to me, it requires alignment with me. It's not cold. It's not dismissive. It's divine. Most men don't change because you keep talking. They change because you finally stop, because now there's a gap they can't ignore, a silence that reveals everything they tried to overlook, a pause that puts the mirror in front of them, not your words. And if he truly cares, he'll feel it. He'll be moved by it. He'll either rise to meet you or reveal that he was never capable of the connection you hoped for. But either way, the silence has done its work. So if you've been wondering whether your silence is noticed, believe me, it is. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but a shift has already started. And it didn't come from yelling, from crying, from explaining for the 100th time. It came from the moment you chose not to say a word. Distance reveals true intention in a way that closeness never can. When you're constantly available, constantly present, constantly responding, it's easy for someone to get comfortable in your presence without ever having to evaluate their own. But when you take a step back, when you create emotional or physical distance, what's real begins to surface. Intention cannot hide in silence. It cannot camouflage in absence. The truth of how someone feels, how much they value you, and whether they are invested in the relationship is exposed when you're no longer right there to make things easy. People will say a lot with their words, but their actions in your absence speak the loudest. A man can tell you he cares, that he loves you, that he wants to be with you. But if your distance doesn't move him to act, then his words are just echoes in empty space. Real intention leads to pursuit. It leads to effort. It leads to clarity, not confusion. And sometimes it's not until you pull away that you truly understand whether someone was there for the benefit of your presence or for the connection of your heart. Distance forces decision. It removes the cushion of your availability. It eliminates the comfort of knowing you'll always answer, always initiate, always fix what's broken. When you step back, you stop doing the emotional labor for two, and now he has to show what he's willing to carry on his own. He has to choose whether to lean in or let go. That's where real intention is revealed, not in what he says in your presence, but in what he does in your absence. When you're always around, people sometimes confuse your effort with their own. They start to believe that the relationship is working because it's mutual, when really it's only surviving because you're constantly stitching it together. But when you step back, when you stop initiating the conversation, stop filling the space with your love and attention, the truth emerges. If he doesn't reach for you when you're no longer within arm's length, he may never have truly seen you. Or worse, he may have only valued what you did, not who you are. Distance is not about punishment, it's about perspective. It gives you a higher view, a broader view, a more honest view of what's really happening. It allows you to see patterns that closeness clouded. It lets you observe whether there's growth, pursuit, reflection, or if there's just silence in return. That silence isn't empty, it's filled with answers. Because if your absence creates peace for him instead of urgency, then you are carrying something he never intended to hold. Many women fear creating distance because they've been conditioned to believe that pulling away means losing something. But what you're actually doing is positioning yourself to gain clarity. You're choosing truth over illusion. You're no longer giving someone unlimited access to your time, your love, your energy without first understanding their intention. And that shift doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. It means you're no longer content with one-sided connection masked as companionship. A man's true character is revealed when you're no longer readily available. Will he pursue you when you're silent? Will he ask questions when you go quiet? Will he lean in when you're no longer pouring out? These are the questions that distance answers, not through words, but through action, because the one who values you will feel your absence and respond to it, not just with emotion, but with intention. He'll move towards you, not just because you're gone, but because he recognizes who you are. We sometimes stay too close for too long, hoping they'll wake up while we're still there. But some men don't wake up until you're gone. And even then, only the ones who are truly connected to your spirit will notice. The others were connected to convenience. They were connected to comfort. They were connected to what you gave, not who you are. Distance helps you discern the difference. It shows you who is willing to reach across the gap and who was only holding on because you were within reach. Distance also reveals your own clarity. When you're always near, always engaging, you don't have space to see what's really happening. You're emotionally entangled, responding in real time, reacting in survival mode. But when you step back, when you stop giving out of fear and start protecting your peace, your discernment increases. You start to recognize what you truly need, not just what you were settling for. You see, the patterns you once excused, you acknowledge the effort or lack thereof you once justified. That space helps you remember who you are. And in that remembering, you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. You stop hoping someone will rise to your value and start living in a way that reflects it. Distance teaches you the difference between someone who is present because you're persistent and someone who's present because they want to be. Between someone who stays because of pressure and someone who stays because of purpose. These are things you cannot see clearly when you're too close, too emotional, too involved. Some people only show their truth when they have nothing left to gain, and your distance removes the gain. It strips away the benefits of your presence, the ease of your communication, the comfort of your love, and leaves only the question, were you here for me or for what I gave you? That question cannot be answered by conversation alone. It is answered by response in your absence. Who checks in? Who follows up? Who steps up without your prompting? That's how intention is revealed. Distance is not always about walking away. Sometimes it's about stepping aside to see who follows. It's about pausing to see who notices the change, who feels the void, who is moved to action, not because you told them to, but because they want to. You can't force someone to value you, but you can create space long enough to see if they truly do. And if they don't, that revelation is still a gift. Because now you're no longer investing in something that was never real. The weight of emotional distance unsettles those who only knew how to function in your presence. It reveals who is performing and who is genuine. It reveals the level of investment that exists when no one's watching, when no one's talking, when no one is making an effort on your behalf. That's the kind of insight that closeness can't provide. Closeness is beautiful when it's mutual, when it's fueled by shared effort and aligned purpose. But when it's one-sided, it becomes a mask. And only distance has the power to remove it. Your absence teaches what your presence tolerated. Sometimes we don't realize how much we've been allowing until we remove ourselves from the equation. Presence can be powerful, but it can also be pacifying. It can soothe dysfunction, cover disrespect, and camouflage neglect. When you continue to show up in spaces where you are not honored, you unintentionally communicate that it's okay to be treated with less than you deserve. Your presence becomes the permission slip for behavior you wouldn't tolerate if you were standing fully in your worth. But the moment you step back, the lesson begins. The moment you stop showing up, stop calling, stop initiating, the reality sets in. The absence starts to speak where your presence once remained silent. We teach people how to treat us not just with our words, but with what we allow, what we excuse, and what we stay silent about. You may think you're being understanding, patient, supportive, but if those efforts are not being met with mutual respect and intentional effort, they can quickly turn into silent permission. Over time, someone can get used to your presence even when they're giving you the bare minimum. And once someone gets used to you tolerating less, they stop striving to give more. That's why absence becomes necessary. It becomes the wake-up call, not to hurt them, but to heal you. Your absence disrupts the rhythm. It throws off the dynamic. The daily calls, the predictable texts, the constant emotional check-ins, they all stop. And in that space, the other person is left to sit with themselves, with their behavior, with the consequences of what they took for granted. It is only in your absence that some men realize how much you were holding, how much you were giving, how much you were caring in silence. They start to feel the weight of your withdrawal. And in that weight is a lesson that presence could never teach. Being consistently available while being consistently dismissed is a silent kind of suffering. You start to lower your expectations, adjust your standards, bite your tongue, all in the name of keeping the peace. But real peace isn't built on pretending you're okay with being unappreciated. Real peace comes from alignment, from being loved in a way that honors your soul, not just your body or your time. And when that love is not reciprocated, the best thing you can do is remove yourself, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. When a woman decides to walk away, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally, she breaks this cycle of tolerance. She stops being the glue holding together a dynamic that was never meant to be sustained through one-sided effort. And once you step out of that space, the void you leave behind becomes a mirror that reflects everything your presence was covering. The conversations you avoided, the behaviors you excused, the needs you buried, they all rise to the surface in your absence. Sometimes people don't change because they never have to face the impact of their actions. Your constant presence becomes their comfort zone. They know you'll always be there, always forgive, always reach out. But when you remove yourself, when you stop responding, stop engaging, stop making excuses, the shift becomes undeniable. Suddenly they have to deal with what it feels like to not have you, not just physically, but emotionally. They realize that the connection they took lightly actually meant everything. The power of absence is that it reveals what presence made invisible. You begin to see who values you when you're no longer making yourself easy to reach, who checks in when you're not checking on them, who notices your silence when you're no longer filling the space with your effort. People can say they love you all day long, but love is proven in action, not just in emotion. It's seen in how someone responds when they no longer have the benefit of your consistent love without accountability. Absence teaches through consequence, not revenge, not manipulation, but natural spiritual consequence, the loss of access, the loss of comfort, the loss of emotional security. And in that loss, a man must decide whether he was in love with your presence or just comfortable in your availability. If it was real, he'll reflect. He'll reach out. He'll show change. If it wasn't, he'll retreat. And that too is a revelation, a painful one maybe, but a necessary one. Because your presence was never meant to be wasted in places where you were only barely appreciated. Women often stay because of potential, because of hope, because of love. But love alone doesn't build healthy relationships. There must be respect, consistency, intention. If those things are missing, your presence won't fix it. It will only prolong the inevitable. Your absence, however, brings clarity. It puts the situation in perspective. And not just for him, but for you. You begin to see how much you were tolerating just to be loved. How much of yourself you were shrinking to be accepted. The absence shows you what's real. It shows you whether the connection was rooted in depth or just dependency. And it shows him that you are not afraid to walk away from what doesn't serve your soul. That's not ego. That's self-love. That's spiritual alignment. That's maturity. It means you trust that the right love will never require you to betray your own worth to keep it. And anyone who requires you to do so was never loving you in the first place. They were using your presence to fill a void they were never willing to heal. Sometimes your presence becomes part of the problem, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're staying in something that's no longer right. And your staying gives them no reason to shift, no reason to grow, no reason to reflect. Absence creates that reason. It says, I love you, but I love me more. It says, I gave my all, but I'm no longer going to give in vain. It says, I deserve to be seen, not just tolerated. And if you can't see me when I'm here, maybe you'll understand what you lost when I'm gone. People remember how you made them feel, but they also remember how it felt when you stopped making them feel anything. That contrast is what teaches. The love you once gave becomes a standard they may not find again. The care you once offered becomes a memory they might chase but never duplicate. And the void you leave behind becomes the consequence of not valuing the gift that was your presence. Because you were not just there. You were showing up fully, consistently, authentically. And once that stops, the lesson begins.